High Commander stood on the bridge of his bioship, watching the last city burn below. The crystalline structures that once gleamed like jewels across the planet's surface now melted into pools of liquid glass. His warriors had done their work well. The Iran swarm had conquered another world. Its 12-foot frame towered over the organic control panels that pulsed with living tissue. His 4 arms moved across the biocontrols with practiced ease. Each finger ended in a razor-sharp claw that could cut through steel. His exoskeleton, black as space itself, reflected the dying light of the burning city below. "Status report," he commanded. His voice carried the authority of 3 centuries of conquest. Sub-Commander Ara scuttled forward on 6 legs. Her acidic saliva dripped onto the floor, creating small holes in the organic metal. "The cleansing is complete, High Commander. No survivors detected. Their defense forces dissolved within the first hour." Nodded, they had been a peaceful species. They built beautiful cities and created art that other races traveled light years to see. They had never fought a war. They didn't know how. That was why they were dead. "Casualties?" asked. 17 wounded, none killed. The energy weapons barely scratched our armor. Another easy victory. Remembered when conquests had been challenging. In the early days of the swarm's expansion, some species had fought back. The silicon-based had resisted for almost a year before falling. The energy beings of 7 had destroyed 3 bioships before being exterminated. But those days were long past. The galaxy had learned to fear the Iran. Most species surrendered as soon as the swarm's bioships appeared in their system. "Prepare the breeding chambers," ordered. "This world will birth a new generation of warriors." The planet would be stripped of all useful resources. The oceans would be drained to feed the bioships. The forests would be consumed to create new warriors. Within a year, nothing would remain but a dead rock floating in space. This was the way of the swarm. The strong consumed the weak. It was the most basic law of existence. Its bioship, the devourer of worlds, was itself a living creature. Its heart beat steadily in the walls around him. Its nervous system carried his commands to every part of the massive vessel. When he was hungry, the ship fed him through tubes that connected to his body. When he was tired, it rocked him to sleep with gentle movements. The ship had been grown specifically for him 300 years ago when he first became High Commander. Together, they had conquered 47 star systems. They had enslaved 12 different species. They had driven 3 others to complete extinction. No military force had ever successfully resisted them. A communication pulse flowed through the ship's nervous system, placed his hand on the biocontrol panel, and felt the message directly through his nerves. The Galactic Council was trying to contact him again. He allowed the transmission to come through. "High Commander," came the voice of Council Speaker, a multi-tentacled creature from the vegan system. "We implore you to consider our latest offer. 3 uninhabited systems on the outer rim in exchange for peace. Surely this is more valuable than continued warfare." His mandibles clicked together in what might have been laughter. The Council had made similar offers before. They always spoke of peace and compromise. They offered tribute and territory. They begged for mercy. They did not understand the nature of the swarm. "Council Speaker," replied, his voice carrying across space through the bioship's communication organs. "You offer us what we can simply take. Your words are meaningless. The strong do not negotiate with the weak. But surely there must be some way to." Cut the transmission. He had no time for the Council's pleading. There were more worlds to conquer. The bioship's sensors detected movement in the outer system. Scout vessels returning from their missions felt their approach through his connection to the ship's nervous system. Minutes later, Scout Leader Al entered the bridge. Like all Iran, he was built for war. His shell was from countless battles. His claws were permanently stained with the blood of enemies. "Report," commanded. The forward scouts have completed their survey of the next target system, High Commander. The species calls themselves humans. They inhabit the third planet from their sun, plus several smaller colonies throughout the system. Access the scout's data through the ship's bio-network. Images flowed into his mind. Bipedal creatures with soft, pink skin. No natural weapons. No protective shell. They seemed to require a very specific atmosphere to survive. They looked weak. "Have they responded to our demand for surrender?" asked. Al's antennae twitched nervously. "They have, High Commander, but their response was unusual." "Explain." "They refused." Studied the scouts' memories more carefully. The human worlds were small and scattered. Their population was tiny compared to most species the swarm had conquered. Their technology appeared primitive. Their military forces were laughably small. Yet they had refused to surrender. "Perhaps they do not understand what fate awaits them," Ara suggested. "Many species refuse at first, until they see what happens to those who resist." Considered this. It was true that some species needed to see the swarm's power before they accepted reality. The humans might simply be naive. "How long do you estimate their conquest will require?" he asked Al. "No more than 3 weeks, High Commander, possibly less. Their defenses are primitive. Their numbers are small. They have no bioweapons, no living ships. They appear to rely entirely on mechanical technology." Mechanical technology. Found it amusing that any spacefaring species would still depend on dead machines instead of living organisms. It showed how backward they truly were. "Very well," he decided. "Signal the fleet. We advance on the human system immediately. Perhaps a quick victory will restore some challenge to our conquests." As the swarm's massive fleet began to move toward human space, felt the familiar anticipation of battle. Soon, another species would learn the price of defying the Oran. Soon, the humans would join the long list of extinct civilizations. The strong would devour the weak, as they always had. Admiral Sarah stared at the holographic display in the command center of New Geneva Station. The message had arrived 6 hours ago through quantum communication channels. It was short and to the point. "Submit or be consumed." The transmission came from something calling itself the Oran Swarm. According to the attached data, they were responsible for the destruction of 47 star systems. They had wiped out entire species. They were moving toward human space. "Ma'am," Lieutenant called from his station, "the UN Security Council is requesting an immediate briefing." Sarah nodded. She had been expecting this call. As commander of Earth's outer defense network, she would be humanity's first line of defense against whatever was coming. The hologram changed to show the faces of 12 world leaders. President Harrison of the North American Federation leaned forward in his chair. "Admiral, what's your assessment of this threat?" Sarah pulled up the intelligence reports that had been flooding in from across the galaxy. Based on communications from the Galactic Council and refugee ships, the Oran Swarm is the most dangerous military force in known space. They've been expanding for 3 centuries. No species has ever successfully resisted them. "What are we dealing with exactly?" asked Prime Minister of the Asian Coalition. Ambassador, humanity's representative to the Galactic Council, appeared on screen from his ship near Council headquarters. His face looked grim. "I've been monitoring their advance for months. They're not just conquerors, they're exterminators. They don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They arrive, demand surrender, and if you refuse, they kill everything." The room fell silent. Sarah watched the faces of humanity's leaders as they processed this information. She had been a soldier for 30 years. She had seen war and death, but this was something else entirely. "How do they fight?" General asked. Brought up images captured by long-range sensors. "Their ships are alive, biological constructs that can heal themselves and adapt to new weapons. They use biowarfare acid weapons, and something called fear pheromones that cause panic in most species. They're physically massive, around 12 feet tall, with natural armor and claws that can cut through steel. Dr. Humanity's leading studied the images carefully. Their entire approach seems to be based on biological superiority. They've evolved for combat over millions of years. Most species they encounter are either peaceful or rely on technology rather than natural weapons. What about their numbers? Sarah asked. Conservative estimates put their fleet at over 10,000 bioships, replied. Each ship carries anywhere from 500 to 5,000 warriors. They reproduce quickly and use conquered worlds as breeding grounds for new forces. The numbers were staggering. Humanity had less than 200 military vessels spread across a dozen systems. Their total population was barely 8 billion. They were completely outnumbered. Have they given us time to consider their demand? President Harrison asked. 72 hours, said. That's longer than they usually give, but I think it's because they see us as particularly primitive. They probably expect us to surrender without a fight. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. She had spent her life protecting human colonies from pirates and hostile alien encounters. She had never backed down from a fight. What does the Galactic Council recommend? She asked. His expression darkened. They recommend immediate surrender. They say resistance is suicide. Several council members have offered to help negotiate terms for our submission. Terms for submission? General laughed bitterly. You mean terms for our extinction? That's exactly what I mean, confirmed. The Oran don't keep slaves or vassals. They eliminate potential threats. Any species capable of space flight is seen as a threat. Doctor leaned back in her chair. We're analyzing them through our own understanding of biology and warfare, but they've been doing this for centuries. They know how to break species mentally before they even arrive. Fear is their greatest weapon. Sarah looked around the room at humanity's leadership. She saw fear in their eyes. She saw the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on their shoulders. She saw people trying to find a solution to an impossible problem. What are our options? President Harrison asked quietly. Surrender and hope they kill us quickly, said. Fight and guarantee they kill us slowly. Or run and let them chase us across the galaxy until they catch us. There's a fourth option, Sarah said. Everyone turned to look at her. We make them regret coming here. General raised an eyebrow. Admiral, I appreciate the sentiment, but the numbers don't lie. We can't win a conventional war against them. Then we don't fight a conventional war, Sarah replied. Doctor, you said they've evolved for combat, but evolution is slow. They've been using the same tactics for centuries because they work. What if we don't fight the way other species fight? Doctor considered this. Most species they encounter are either peaceful or fight defensively. They rely on their natural advantages, size, strength, biological weapons. But humans, we've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've learned things about warfare that peaceful species never needed to learn. Such as? President Harrison asked. Sarah smiled grimly. Asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, guerrilla tactics. We've spent our entire history figuring out how to defeat enemies who were bigger and stronger than us. The Oran might be evolved predators, but we're evolved survivors. Captain Jake, watching from Mars Command, joined the discussion. The Admiral's right. These aliens have been fighting species that surrendered quickly or fought fair. Humans don't fight fair. We fight dirty. We adapt. We improvise. Doctor pulled up biological data on the Oran. Their advantages come from their evolution, but evolution creates vulnerabilities too. They're cold-blooded, which makes them vulnerable to temperature extremes. They have bioelectric nervous systems, which means electromagnetic weapons might be effective. Their armor is biological, which means it can be poisoned or infected. You're talking about fighting beings who can survive in space with their bare hands, said. They've conquered civilizations 1,000 times more advanced than ours. No, Sarah corrected. They've conquered civilizations that thought like civilizations. We need to think like humans. The debate continued for hours. Plans were drawn up and discarded. Resources were calculated and recalculated. But slowly, a strategy began to emerge. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't honorable. It involved tactics that would horrify the peaceful species of the Galactic Council. But it was human. As the meeting ended, Sarah returned to her command center. Lieutenant was monitoring long-range sensors. "Any movement from the Oran fleet?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. They're 3 days out from the outer colonies, moving slowly, probably expecting us to surrender before they arrive." Sarah nodded. Across human space, the evacuation had already begun. Civilian populations were being moved to fortified positions. Military assets were being repositioned. Weapons that had never been tested in combat were being loaded onto ships. The Oran expected humanity to fight like every other species they had encountered. They expected fear and panic and desperate defensive actions. They were going to be surprised. Sarah opened a communication channel to all human military commanders. Her message was simple: all civilian populations evacuated, defensive positions established. Come and take it. The attack on station began at dawn, local time. Watch from his bioship as the first wave of Oran warriors descended on the human outpost. The station orbited a gas giant on the edge of human space. Intelligence suggested it housed 50,000 humans and served as a major supply depot. It should have fallen within hours. "First wave has landed," reported Subcommander Ara. "Warriors are advancing through the outer sections." Studied the tactical display. The humans had not fled. Most species evacuated their civilians when the swarm approached, leaving only military forces behind. But sensor readings showed the station still crowded with life signs. Perhaps humans were too primitive to organize proper evacuations. "Resistance levels?" he asked. "Light at first. Small arms fire, nothing that can penetrate warrior armor, but—" Ara paused, her antennae twitching. "High Commander, the humans are using unusual tactics." The first sign of trouble came from Squad Leader's unit. They had breached the station's outer hull and were advancing through residential areas. The humans had barricaded themselves into small groups throughout the section. "Prey cornered in their nests," reported, moving to eliminate them. That was when the explosion happened. The entire residential section erupted in a ball of flame and debris, and 30 of his warriors vanished in an instant. The humans had destroyed their own living areas rather than let the Oran capture them. "What happened?" demanded. "The humans triggered some kind of explosive device," Ara reported, her voice confused. "They destroyed their own habitat to kill our warriors." Stared at the tactical display. In 3 centuries of warfare, he had never seen defenders destroy their own territory. It went against every survival instinct. When cornered, species either fought to defend their nests or fled to preserve their lives. They didn't deliberately destroy both. "Perhaps it was an accident," he suggested. "Their primitive technology malfunctioned." But more reports flooded in from other assault teams. The humans were fighting from prepared positions throughout the station. They had turned their own infrastructure into a weapon. Corridors were rigged with explosives. Life support systems had been modified to create. Even the gravity generators were being used against the Oran. Captain Jake crouched behind an overturned table in station's main bazaar. Around him, a dozen human Marines checked their weapons and ammunition. They had been fighting for 6 hours, and the aliens were getting closer. "What's the status on Section C?" he called into his communicator. "Sealed off, sir. We collapsed the main corridor after Squad 3 pulled back. The bugs are going to have to cut through 50 tons of debris to get through." Smiled grimly. The aliens were stronger and tougher than humans, but they fought like animals. They used brute force and biological weapons. They expected their enemies to be afraid. Humans had stopped being afraid after the first hour. "You ready with that surprise package?" Corporal held up a device that looked like a standard emergency beacon. "Modified magnetic pulse generator, sir. Should disrupt their bioelectric nervous systems. At least, that's what the science team thinks." Nodded. Doctor had been right about the aliens' vulnerabilities. Their biological nature gave them advantages, but it also gave humans something to target. The electromagnetic pulse wouldn't kill them, but it would hurt them. And hurt aliens made mistakes. "Here they come," whispered. 3 Oran warriors rounded the corner, their claws clicking on the metal floor. They were massive, towering over the human positions. Their black armor gleamed under the station's emergency lighting. Acidic saliva dripped from their mandibles. They looked invincible. Triggered the pulse device. The aliens convulsed as electromagnetic energy flooded their nervous systems. They didn't fall, but they stumbled. For a few seconds, they were vulnerable. That was all humans needed. The Marines opened fire with weapons designed specifically for this battle. Concentrated ultraviolet lasers that burned through the aliens' photosensitive organs. Cryogenic rounds that slowed their cold-blooded metabolism. Electromagnetic projectiles that disrupted their internal bioelectric systems. The 3 warriors fell. "Move," shouted. "Fall back to position 7. The humans scattered through maintenance tunnels and service corridors that the aliens' large frames couldn't navigate easily. They had studied the station's layout for weeks, turning every ventilation shaft and access hatch into part of their defense network. Back on his bioship, watched his casualty reports with growing alarm. In 6 hours of fighting, the swarm had lost over 300 warriors against humans, against a species that had barely entered space a century ago. "How many humans have we killed?" he asked. Ara consulted the biological sensors. "Approximately 50 confirmed kills, High Commander." 300 Oran dead, 50 humans dead. The mathematics made no sense. His warriors were individually superior to any human. They should have achieved at least a 10-to-1 kill ratio. "What are they doing differently?" he demanded. Scout leader Al had been monitoring human communications. "High Commander, they appear to be using their own infrastructure as weapons. They have modified their station systems to harm our warriors. They also seem to have prepared specific countermeasures for our biological advantages." Countermeasures. Electromagnetic weapons that disrupt our nervous systems. Temperature-based attacks that exploit our metabolism. They have somehow identified our physiological weaknesses and designed weapons to exploit them. Felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Uncertainty. The humans were not fighting like any species the swarm had encountered before. They were not trying to preserve their territory or their lives. They were fighting to cause maximum damage to the Oran, even if it meant destroying everything they valued. "Deploy the fear pheromones," he ordered. "Break their will to resist." Biowarfare specialist Dr. Ara released clouds of chemical compounds designed to trigger panic in most sentient species. The pheromones had broken the resistance of dozens of civilizations. They caused uncontrollable terror that made organized defense impossible. The humans' response came 20 minutes later. "This is Captain to all Oran forces," the transmission said. "Your chemical weapons smell like rotting fish. Thanks for the warning that you're nearby." The fear pheromones had no effect on humans whatsoever. Dr. Ara studied her biological readings in confusion. "High Commander, their brain chemistry is not responding as expected. The pheromones should trigger massive anxiety responses, but their stress levels are actually decreasing." "Decreasing?" "Yes, High Commander. It appears the pheromone release has actually calmed them down. They seemed to interpret the chemical warning as useful tactical information. Stared at the tactical display. His bioships surrounded the station. His warriors outnumbered the humans 50-1. He had weapons that could dissolve the station's hull in minutes. But the humans kept fighting. They fought from positions that couldn't be defended. They used weapons that shouldn't have worked. They sacrificed their own territory and people to achieve tactical advantages. They seemed to have no concept of acceptable losses or strategic retreat. "Sir," his voice came over the radio to his remaining Marines. "Engineering reports that the main reactor is overloading. We can either evacuate or vent the plasma directly into the alien boarding parties." "How many aliens would that take out?" asked. "All of them in sections A through D, but it would also kill anyone still in those areas." "Any of our people still in those sections?" "Squad 5 is pinned down in Section C." There was silence on the radio for several seconds. "Squad 5, this is. We're about to vent plasma through your area. You've got 60 seconds to get clear." "Negative, Captain," came Sergeant Wilson's voice. "We've got 20 aliens trapped in this corridor. If you vent now, you'll take out all of them plus us. Do it." Closed his eyes. "Copy that, Squad 5. It's been an honor." "Honor's ours, sir, for Earth." Triggered the plasma vent. Watched 20 of his finest warriors die in a flood of superheated gas, along with 5 humans who had chosen death over retreat. For the first time in 3 centuries, the High Commander of the Oran Swarm began to understand that this would not be a conquest. This would be a war. 6 months after the Battle of Station, General Torres stood in the war room of New Geneva Station, studying star charts that showed a very different conflict than anyone had expected. Red markers indicated Oran positions. Blue markers showed human forces. 6 months ago, the red had been advancing steadily toward Earth. Now, the blue markers were scattered throughout Oran territory, striking at will and disappearing like ghosts. The war had changed. "Report from Operation Nightfall," Lieutenant Commander Singh announced. "The UES Prometheus successfully destroyed 3 Oran bioships in the Vega system. No human casualties." Torres nodded. The Prometheus was one of 12 stealth ships that human engineers had built specifically for hunting Oran vessels. They were small, fast, and nearly invisible to biological sensors. More importantly, they carried weapons that the aliens had never encountered before. "What about the Alpha raid?" she asked. "Complete success, General. Commander Park's team destroyed the breeding facility and escaped before reinforcements arrived. Intelligence estimates we set back their reproduction cycle by at least 2 years in that sector." Torres allowed herself a small smile. Human special operations teams had become a nightmare for the Oran Swarm. They struck without warning, caused maximum damage, and vanished before the aliens could respond. The Swarm's biological advantages meant nothing when they couldn't find their enemies. On board the bioship Devourer of Worlds, High Commander studied casualty reports that all his understanding of warfare. In 6 months, the Swarm had lost over 1,000 bioships to human attacks. They had been forced to abandon 3 star systems. Their expansion had not just stopped, it had reversed. "How is this possible?" he demanded from Dr. Ara. "Humans have no natural weapons. Their technology is primitive. Their numbers are tiny compared to ours." Dr. Ara's research had become increasingly desperate as the war progressed. "High Commander, humans appear to possess biological advantages that we initially overlooked. Their redundant organ systems allow them to survive injuries that would kill most species. Their high pain tolerance lets them continue fighting when others would be incapacitated. Most significantly, they seem to be immune to the psychological effects of warfare that cripple other species." "Explain." "Fear, High Commander. All intelligent species experience fear when facing superior enemies. It causes them to make mistakes, retreat, or surrender. But humans, they seem to function better under stress. They become more creative, more dangerous, more willing to take risks that no sane creature would consider. Had seen evidence of this firsthand. Human tactics grew increasingly bizarre as the war continued. They had weaponized cargo ships by filling them with nuclear explosives and ramming them into bioships. They had developed biological viruses specifically designed to target Oran metabolism. They had even begun using preserved human remains as psychological warfare against the swarm's warriors. The breaking point came during the Battle of Titan's Shadow. Hunter-Killer was the swarm's most elite warrior. He had personally killed over 3,000 enemies across dozens of worlds. His biomodifications made him faster and stronger than even normal Oran. He had never been defeated in single combat. He was leading an assault on a human mining facility when the attack began. The humans had evacuated all civilians, as usual. What remained was a skeleton crew of Marines who should have been easily overwhelmed. Led 50 of his best warriors through the facility's corridors, expecting routine slaughter. Instead, he found hell. The humans had turned the entire facility into a death trap. Every corridor was rigged with explosives. Every room contained hidden weapons. The very air had been weaponized with chemical compounds designed to burn Oran respiratory systems. But the worst part was the humans themselves. They didn't retreat, they didn't surrender, they didn't show fear. Instead, they attacked with a savagery that shocked even the swarm's warriors. They used improvised weapons, pieces of mining equipment, industrial chemicals, even their own tools. When their weapons ran out, they fought with their bare hands. When they were dying, they triggered explosive devices rather than let the Oran capture them. Sergeant Maria Santos pulled the pins from 3 grenades as Hunter-Killer. Claws pierced her chest. She held on to him as the explosives detonated, ensuring that the swarm's greatest warrior died with her. The surviving Oran found her body still clutching his remains. Even in death, she had not let go. When news of his death reached the swarm fleet, something changed in the Oran psyche. For the first time in their species' history, they began to experience fear. Doctor worked in a laboratory deep beneath Earth's surface, developing weapons that existed in the nightmares of. The Prometheus Protocol was her masterpiece, a bioweapon that specifically targeted the Oran's hive mind communication system. The aliens used bioelectric signals to coordinate their attacks. Their nervous systems were linked through organic radio waves that allowed instant communication across vast distances. It was one of their greatest tactical advantages. Until humans learned to weaponize it. The Prometheus virus caused neural feedback in the Oran communication network. Instead of coordination, it created chaos. Warriors began receiving contradictory orders. Some lost the ability to distinguish between allies and enemies. Others experienced total sensory overload that left them catatonic. The first test was conducted on an Oran patrol fleet near Neptune. Commander Lisa Park watched through her ships as 12 bioships suddenly turned on each other. The aliens began firing their own weapons at their allied vessels. Within minutes, the entire fleet was destroying itself. "My God," whispered her tactical officer, "they're tearing each other apart." "That's the idea," Park replied grimly. "The virus makes them perceive their own kind as enemies. They'll fight until none of them are left." The psychological effect was devastating. The Oran had built their entire identity around biological superiority and perfect unity. The idea that their own bodies could be turned against them broke something fundamental in their worldview. Received increasingly desperate reports from across the swarm's territory. Human raids were becoming more frequent and more destructive. Entire bioship flotillas were disappearing without trace. Breeding worlds were being sterilized by weapons that left no survivors and no evidence. "High Commander," Subcommander Ara reported, her voice shaking. We have lost contact with the home guard fleets in the Rigel system. Lost contact. Complete communications blackout, sir. The last transmission was a distress signal reporting human ships in the area. That was 18 hours ago. 18 hours ago, the Rigel system had contained the largest concentration of Iran forces outside the home system. Over 2,000 bioships, 50,000 warriors, and 3 breeding worlds. Now there was silence. Send a reconnaissance force, ordered. Sir, the nearest available fleet is in the system, defending against human raiders there. Felt something he had never experienced before, desperation. The swarm's forces were scattered across hundreds of systems, all under attack simultaneously. There were no reserves. There was no safe territory. The humans seemed to be everywhere at once. High Commander, Dr. Ara said quietly, I must report something else. The humans have begun targeting our genetics laboratories. What do you mean? They have somehow obtained samples of Iran DNA. Our scientists believe they are developing biological weapons specifically designed to attack our reproductive systems. His blood turned cold. The swarm had conquered half the galaxy, but they were still fundamentally a biological species. Their reproduction, their growth, their very existence depended on their genetics. If humans could attack that. A communication pulse flowed through the ship's nervous system. The transmission came from the High Council on the home world, using emergency protocols reserved for the gravest threats. High Commander, came the voice of Supreme Leader. You are ordered to return to the home system immediately with all available forces. Supreme Leader, the human territories are not yet secured. If we withdraw. The human territories are irrelevant, interrupted. Human forces have penetrated the inner systems. Our home worlds are under attack. The humans have brought the war to us. Felt the galaxy spinning around him. For 3 centuries, the Iran swarm had been the hunters. They had brought terror to thousands of worlds. They had been the apex predators of space. Now, for the first time in their species' history, they were the prey. And humans were hunting them. The final battle for the Iran home system began with the arrival of Admiral Sarah, combined human fleet. 200 ships, including captured and modified Iran bio-vessels, materialized at the edge of the system that had been the heart of the swarm's empire for 1,000 years. The irony was not lost on. 18 months ago, the Iran had arrived at human space expecting an easy conquest. Now humans had come to their home worlds carrying weapons that the aliens' own scientists had called impossible. Status report called from the bridge of her flagship, the UES Retribution. Long-range sensors detect approximately 3,000 bioships defending the inner system, reported Commander Martinez. They're concentrated around the primary breeding world and the High Council chambers. Nodded. Intelligence had suggested the Iran would make their final stand at their home. What they hadn't expected was how desperate that defense would be. Admiral, came the voice of Doctor from the science station. We're detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. They're accelerating their breeding programs. It looks like they're trying to produce as many warriors as possible before we arrive. Too little, too late, replied. Begin Phase 1. Across human space, the final phase of Operation Total Victory had begun months earlier. Human engineers had learned to turn the Iran's biological nature against them in ways that imagination. The stellar engineering weapons were Dr. James' creation. Working with captured Iran technology, human scientists had developed the ability to manipulate stellar radiation on a massive scale. They could focus a star's energy into concentrated beams, redirect solar winds, and even cause controlled solar flares. Initiating stellar redirection, announced from his position aboard the UES Prometheus. Target: Iran breeding world surface temperature increase of 50 degrees. The Iran were cold-blooded. Their entire biology depended on precise temperature control. A 50-degree increase would sterilize their breeding cycles and kill their developing young. On the surface of the Oran home world, Supreme Leader watched the sky grow brighter as human weapons redirected their sun's energy toward the planet. The breeding chambers, deep underground, began to overheat. Thousands of developing warriors died in their growth tanks. "Impossible," he whispered. "They are manipulating our own star." High Commander stood beside him in the council chamber, watching the destruction of everything his species had built. Through the biological communication network, he could feel the terror of millions of Oran as their home world became uninhabitable. "How did they learn to do this?" demanded. "They adapted," said quietly. "We taught them to fight by attacking them. They learned from every encounter. They took our advantages and turned them into weaknesses." On her flagship, Admiral received reports from across the system. Human forces had divided into dozens of smaller fleets, each targeting specific Oran installations. It was the same strategy they had used throughout the war: strike everywhere at once, never give the enemy time to coordinate a response. "Admiral, the gravitational manipulation systems are online," reported Chief Engineer, "ready to initiate orbital bombardment." Had hoped it wouldn't come to this. The gravitational weapons were humanity's most devastating creation. They could collapse orbital cities, crush bioships, and reshape planetary surfaces. They were also completely indiscriminate. "Open a channel to the Oran High Council," she ordered. Minutes later, the image of Supreme Leader appeared on her screen. The alien leader looked nothing like the confident predator that humanity had first encountered. His exoskeleton was cracked. His movements were slow and uncertain. His eyes showed an emotion that Oran had never displayed before: defeat. "Supreme Leader," said, "I am Admiral Sarah of the United Earth Defense Force. I am authorized to offer you terms for surrender." "You would negotiate with us?" asked, his voice filled with surprise. "We would prefer not to use our final weapons," replied. "But make no mistake, we will use them if necessary." The truth was more complex than let on. Humanity had developed weapons that could exterminate the Oran completely, but using them would make humans as monstrous as their enemies. There had been debates in the UN Security Council about whether total genocide was justified, even against a species that had committed genocide themselves. The decision had been close. "What are your terms?" asked. Brought up the document that had been prepared by human diplomats and military leaders. "Complete and unconditional surrender. All Oran military forces will stand down immediately. Your species will be relocated to designated reservation worlds under human administration. All bioweapons and military technology will be turned over to human forces. Any violation of these terms will result in the immediate implementation of final protocols." Final protocols. Doctor stepped forward. "We have developed a genetic virus that will sterilize your species within 3 generations. The choice is simple: accept our terms or face extinction." The silence stretched for long minutes. Around the system, Oran bioships held their positions, waiting for orders from their leadership. Human forces remained ready to implement weapons that could end an entire species. Finally, Supreme Leader spoke. "We surrender." The formal ceremony took place 1 month later on the surface of the former Oran capital world. The planet's surface had been partially terraformed by human engineers to support both species during the transition period. High Commander stood in chains before a human tribunal. Around him, the last free members of the Oran High Council waited to learn their fate. The irony was overwhelming. The species that had never shown mercy now depended entirely on human mercy for their survival. Admiral read the terms of surrender aloud. The Oran military would be completely disbanded. Their bioships would be destroyed or converted to peaceful purposes. Their remaining population would be settled on 3 worlds under human supervision. Most significantly, any Oran who demonstrated continued aggression would be exiled to uninhabitable worlds with no possibility of rescue. "Do you understand these terms?" asked. "I understand," he replied. His voice carried none of the arrogance that had once made the galaxy tremble. "We have been defeated completely." "More than defeated," corrected. "You have been replaced. The galaxy has learned that the strong do not always devour the weak. Sometimes the weak grow strong enough to fight back." As the ceremony concluded, was led away to begin his new life as a translator and consultant for human. His knowledge of Oran biology would help ensure that his species' dangerous traits were bred out of future generations. 5 years later, the galaxy had settled into a new order. The Galactic Council met on Earth, in facilities provided by humanity. The other species maintained careful diplomatic relations with human colonies, remembering what had happened to those who had mistaken human kindness for weakness. The few surviving Oran lived quietly on their reservation worlds. They farmed. They studied. They taught their young to avoid the mistakes that had led to their downfall. They had become what they had once despised, a peaceful species dependent on others for protection. Spent his days in a human research facility, helping scientists understand Oran biology and technology. At night, he wrote in a journal that would eventually become required reading at military academies across human space. His final entry read, "For 1,000 years, my species believed that fear was weakness. We thought that the ability to feel terror meant a species was inferior. We were wrong. Humans taught us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to function despite fear. They showed us that intelligence is not about being the strongest, but about learning to overcome those who are stronger. We feared nothing because we had never encountered a species that could fear everything and fight anyway. We learned too late that the most dangerous predator is not the one that feels no fear, but the one that conquers fear and turns it into strength. The galaxy is safer now. Humanity has brought peace through strength, mercy through power. They could have destroyed us completely, but they chose to show us a better path. We called ourselves apex predators, but we learned that true apex predators do not just hunt, they protect. They do not just conquer, they lead. They do not just survive, they help others survive as well. Humanity has claimed the title we thought was ours by right, and unlike us, they have earned it. Across human space, children learned about the Oran War in school. They studied the tactics and strategies that had allowed their species to defeat a seemingly impossible enemy. They learned about courage, adaptation, and the power of fighting not just for survival, but for what was right. The galaxy remembered the lesson that the Oran had learned too late. Humanity does not just fight wars. They win them. And in winning, they show the universe what true strength really means.